guys, thanks for coming along and watching this very first video of mine. This is going to be all about the Hueforge and what Hueforge is, how it works, and what you can essentially create using it. My teachings are not the only way. You will obviously go along and hopefully find your own way to use it as time goes on. So to get things started, what is Hueforge? Now, Hueforge is a software that allows you to 3D print your images to essentially create a multi-dimensional print. However, it isn't a paint tool, now nor is it a slicer. Many people sort of go into this thinking that you can get a photocopy image. And if you're one of them, I think you'll actually be a little bit disappointed. And obviously, you can create some amazing prints with it, but it is by no means a photocopy sort of device either. So let's obviously get straight into the nitty-gritty of Hueforge and what it actually does, what these various sort of tabs up here can do, and actually maybe even try and create something to show you how you guys sort of the power behind Hueforge and what we can sort of do with it. Now, you will probably sort of notice straight from the off here that my screen does look slightly different in the fact that my tabs are all up the top here, as your tabs are probably going to be more sort of down the bottom here, and sort of spread out around the top up here. Now, it's quite easy to sort of change the settings if that's what you'd prefer to do. You can sort of click in the relevant areas and sort of just drag these into the area up here and move them. But I just prefer to keep mine like this. It's easier than trying to bounce all around the screen to sort of find the things I need to do. So looking at the tabs that we actually have up here, you'll notice that we have a few options. Now, the first tab we have up here, this is your lighting settings. Now, this is more to do if you are going to be creating lithothane. Now, this will be a video at a much later date. So just for now, I am going to completely skip over that part of it for you. I'm not really going to go into that at this moment. Next tab we have here, we have the model geometry. Now, this is probably the most important tab, a tab that actually, in line with the color slider tab, you will actually use a lot. So we will start with the basics here. So you have your minimum depth. Now, this is the depth in which your base layers will be. This layer is pretty much below the colors that will kind of blend together, and you can sort of up and down these. Now, I generally will leave these right until the mix of when I've got my image loaded, and I will I sort of adjust these as I go. You also have your maximum depth. Now, this is the depth of your overall mesh, sort of the overall print can be. This can be higher than your actual depth, but it cannot be less. Now, as I said, I will actually go through creating my image, and then I will go back and I will sort of be adjusting these these two here as I go. Now, the actual depth here, you can't change this. This is simply just telling you how thick your overall print will be. And then down here, you've got something called your spike removal. Spike removal, this actually helps in getting rid of spikes in your image. These spikes are caused more often than not by bright pixels, generally from using like a low quality image, or if you do something like a background removal or something like that. Spike removal also helps in giving your images in the Hueforge sort of a more smoother effect. Now, you do actually have 3 settings available to you here. So you have sort of a fast setting, moderate, and a more aggressive one. Now, I don't generally notice an awful lot of difference between the moderate and aggressive. But we will go into a lot more detail. We will break each one of these down a bit more into more, upcoming videos and things like that as well. Now over here, you also have your brightness comps, you have your power, your tolerance, you have your smoothing, and your brightness adjust. Now, these sort of settings, these are all dependent on the type of setting which you use here from the drop down box. Now, you've got quite a few options. You've got your standard, your max channel, your combo, scale max, and so on. Now, more specifically here, just because it's been the most common request that I've had, we will be talking more about colour match and how to use colour match. But obviously, as I said, we will go back over a lot more of these options in later videos. I will be making more videos in how to use sort of just your standard and, your colour pops and things like that as well. And that's when these other options will then become more useful, and we'll go into a bit more detail a bit over time. Now, your next tab you have here is your color sliders. Now, this is where I think the fun really starts to happen. This is where sort of the magic happens. And now, before we get added into colors, there is actually a few points to kind of note here. Now, you'll see here, this says transmission distance. Now, what is it? What's the fuss? I'm pretty sure most of you have heard all about it. So, TDs, it's more commonly known. It's about the amount of light that can get through a filament colour. This also helps with calculating the blend between colours, between the layers. Now, most people have heard about the TD1 analyzer that is actually currently on the market by Ajax. And I have my opinions on these, and I will make a video in regarding to my opinions. Is it worth it? Now, that is actually a 2-part question with almost a yes and a no answer. Now, there are also other ways that you can find out your TD through printing test strips. There are lots and lots of options available on the Makerworld webpage. Now, to get the most out of your prints, I do recommend that you take the time and get to know what your transmission distances are, because you really can help to pinpoint down exactly what filaments what your transitional distances are on your filaments, and this really gives you a more accurate result. Next down here you have your layers, your layer number. Now, this is the layer number in which the colour will swap to the next colour. Now, an important thing to note here is you cannot have 2 colours at the same layer number, which sounds obvious. But what will happen here is if I sort of just move this slider down and put this sort of so it's matching at the same number, can you see here that it's actually brought up this red box? Now, what that's actually saying to me is, excuse me, I don't actually know what you need to do here. I've got 2 colours that are in the same area. When it comes through to the slicer, I'm not going to be able to do this. So always be paying attention to what your layer numbers are doing. This will you will just need to adjust it and just, watch where your layer numbers are actually sort of sitting. And So the final tab we actually have over here is just your general options. You have actually a few options here. So you have your layer height, you have your base layer. Now, I generally will always leave these at a 0.8 and a 0.16. I don't generally change these. Detail size. Now, this would very much depend on the type of image that I have. Now, if I have an image that's very kind of blocky, I will generally just leave this at 0.20. But if I do have an image that has a bit more of a finer detail, I will generally drop this down to a 0.10. I find it just brings the details out a little bit more. Now, up here you've got your width and your height. Now, this is how big you actually want your design. Most of mine I sort of make at 200 by 200, but that also depends on the size of your design. But you also need to be aware of the plate size that you have available, because obviously if you have like an A1 mini, you're limited on the plate size that you have. Also, you need to kind of remember as well that you will need to have a prime tower in your slicer. So these kind of information, you don't want to go full size. Now, there are options in your slicer where you can, cut your image and things like that as well. So you can make an image that's 800 by 800 in here, and you can take it into your slicer and you can cut it into sections. Again, that's a video for a whole different time. So let's get into creating something, creating a design. So we're going to start with something quite simple first. We're going to go with something that's a bit of a block image. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can open an image. You can sort of go to your files and sort of drag and drop in, or you can go to File, Open File, and Image. Now, I know my file is placed on my desktop, so I will just open that file from there. Now, as you can see here, this is quite a simple image. There's not an awful lot going on here. It's 4 colours at very most. I've got a yellow in here, I've got a red, I've got a black, and I've got a white. Now, if you come up to here, you will see I have already got my white and my black placed. Now, I have already have them set as standard. I sort of just set them as a default. Now, you also will notice here you have 2 bars. You have what's called a mesh core and a color core. Now, the way that I kind of break this down without almost confusing matters too much, basically what you do you always start in the mesh core. So you will build up your colors in the mesh core first. Then you'll move over to your color core and basically repeat the same as what you've done in your mesh in your color. Now, I like to think of it as building a paper mache. So your mesh core is almost your bloom. And then your color core is everything else added onto it. Now, your color core obviously allows that, shows how the final image will come out once all your blending is in. And your mesh core, it allows you just to sort of build up the filament painting by the mesh by sort of picking the colors and just placing them sort of into the sliders, sort of just telling the system sort of how the cores will sort of be laid down. So, sort of the background of the image, and it will sort of attempt to sort of just build it along the way. Obviously, I will do a whole sort of more of an in-depth sort of explanation of that at another point. Now, to create this sort of image here, what you will notice as I sort of move over the image, you will see this kind of bar here moving up and down. Now, what this is sort of telling me is actually where these colours would need to be placed. Now, if you also come and look at the lumency over here, you will actually see that these kind of match in the brightness of these here. Now, so what's sort of the red is in this one looking more like the darker grey, and the yellow is more in the more lighter grey. Now, this is actually quite helpful because it actually allows for you to sort of see where you can place your colours. Now, to find a colour that's a bit more of a match, you could go down to your filament library. Obviously, this will be placed in various different areas depending on how you've got your screen set. Now, you could go again here and filter out and type in red. That's quite a reasonable way to do it. Or you could right click and you can actually click here and go find closest filament. Now, this will bring up all the options that I have that are close to this image. Now, as I've just said, here you can sort of see down on this bar, this is telling me, as I said, that this is closer to this colour here. So what I can actually do from here is I can select the red, left click on your mouse and simply just drag and drop. Now you'll sort of look at that and you'll go, oh, but it's taken all of the colour. And yep, it's picked up even the section of this yellow here. But if I was to then, again, right click and click find closest filament and select my yellow and do the same and drop that into my grey, you will now also notice that it's actually picked up and dropped it into the right sort of areas. Now, playing with these sliders, if I was to move these up and down a little bit, you can sort of see that it's, if I was to move that a bit too far, you would see that it's taken this background that's a bit more white and turned it more sort of a yellow, which is obviously, we don't want that. That's not what we sort of want. Now, if you remember last time I said to you, I sort of leave this until a little while after before I come in and play, and this is where I would actually then take use of this. Now what I would do here is I would actually bump that up just by a couple, and you will actually see here that this has now changed this, and it's also changed the actual depth as well. Now, as I said to you, what you do in the mesh core, you must also do in the color core. Now you can also notice down here that you've got a few sort of darker shadings. So in the same way that you've sort of just dropped and dragged these, you can also move these over to other slides as well by simply clicking and dragging across. Now, if I was to bring another red in and just slightly bring this up, you can actually, again, slightly manipulate so you can get a bit more shading. Now, it will take a bit of manipulation until you're completely satisfied with it. But, you know, let's just pretend for argument's sake now, because we don't want to make this a 45-minute video of me just manipulating this one image. Like I said, what you do in the mesh, you must also do in the colour. Now, you could flick it back over, you could go into here again and choose exactly the same colours that you've just chosen for your mesh core into your colour core. But the easiest way I've actually found is actually turning these off, bringing the first slider up so it is level with what is in my mesh core, flicking back over to my mesh, and then from here I will select in this bottom box here and simply dragging and dropping. From here, I can then just manipulate that up, and the same as to here. Now again, my white is already preset, so I don't need to drag and drop that one in. Now if I again just flick that back over, you'll notice I've got these few gaps here. Now what you can do is, if you see this button here, you've got the sort sliders. Now if you was to click that button, you'll see that it will automatically sort my sliders into order of where they need to be. Now, as I said, you could sit here and you could go through and we could really manipulate this image to get it to a point where you've got all your blending in. But, you know, that's not really the point of this video. This is more just to sort of show you how you can get the colour matching in, and using your sliders here or even up the top here, you can really start to blend your colours down to really get them matches in. So yeah, once you're happy with that, you can obviously then go and you can save, and you can then obviously move that off into your slicer. So that's a very simple image. Now obviously, the more complex of an image that you get onto, there will be a lot more into that. And I have got another image that I can show you with a little bit more, that does require a little bit more work with it as well. So let's move over to that one now, and we can take a look into how that one will work. So moving on now then to the next part. Now this is working with an image that has a little bit more colour than the previous one. Now let me bring the image up first, and at first it can obviously look a bit daunting. Now again, if we go file, open file and image, and we will go to our file location. Once again, mine is placed on my desktop. Now as you can see here, this is quite an in-depth image. It's got sort of a lot going on here. You know, you've got quite a range of sort of colours here. You've got your blues, you've got your reds, you've got your oranges, yellows, your whites. You've got a bit of grey in here, sort of a bit of a brownishy green down here. So there is an awful lot sort of colours and things sort of going on here in the screen. Now, off of the bat, what I generally do is I will come into here and I will straight away turn off these two middle colours. Now I can tell you just from experience really, that this image is likely to turn out as sort of maybe 6 colours. Now I don't think we're going to need 7. I think I could probably do it in probably 6 colours. Now the important part to understanding an image like such and how to make the most of your filaments is understanding colours and colour blending. Now, if you was to mix a red and a yellow, that will allow us to get our orange. So therefore, that actually saves us from having to use a whole other colour filament. Now, let me show you. Now, I generally will start with what would be my background. So my background here is this section right here. Now, always remembering, as I said previously, about starting in your mesh core. Now, if you come over to here and this time, instead of right-clicking and sort of, you know, finding closest filament, because there's a lot of different colors here, this is going to give you a lot of various different options. So from the bat here, instead of actually right clicking and finding closest filament, I'm actually just going to go in and just search out a red. Now the bamboo red is always a very good red to start with. I mean, the king green red is actually a gorgeous red as well, but for this purpose we're going to use a bamboo red. Now I will drop that into the first zeroed out slider. Now what I will do is if I bring this up, now you will notice that it kind of takes the whole image. Now I wouldn't worry too much about that. What I would actually be looking at is this area here and this area here, and up on top of the lighthouse where we've actually got our red points, and in this back wave here. So you can already sort of see that actually that's got that quite well in place. So the next thing I would do is I would be like, right, okay, what's my next colour? Now, I could go in, like I said, and I could pick an orange. But why do that when blending a yellow in with the red can give me a very nice orange? And let me show you just how. So once again, let me go down into my filter section and I'll filter this out and I'll find myself a yellow. Now, I will, again, just for this purpose, I will use a bamboo yellow, but I do also own a king green yellow. Now, again, pulling this up through the slides, you can actually already see here where I've placed the yellow just above the black. This has actually turned this to sort of a tinge of green, because obviously when you mix black with yellow, you do get a green. So in the same principle here, as you come up through the layers, you would already notice here, we're starting to get a bit of a yellow blend. But we want to pull this up and through to where the yellow starts to pull out. Now, you can really start to see here that the orange and the red and the yellow has really sort of come into play. Now, you'll remember me saying earlier that I don't really adjust my geometry until I start to play with my model. Now, this is one of them instances where I won't actually start to, move my geometry around until I start to get to this point. Now, I sort of find that this is actually a very good point to start playing with my geometry, because if you just look here, I've kind of started to lose my whites a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll come over to my model geometry and I will look for my max depth, and I will just give that a couple of 3 clicks just to start to bring that up and through. Now, as I start to do that, I look here as to where my whites are. Now, in this white up here, I notice that I've got this kind of blue shading, but I've also got this blue down here in the waves and also in this sort of stone section. Now, as I move through my waves, you can kind of see that this is almost bouncing up and down this whole scale. But what we need to do is we go in and we find ourselves a nice sort of blue. Now, there's quite a bit of a mix here, but if we go in and again type in blue, we've kind of got a few options. Now, if we're sort of comparing with almost our lightest blue here, our sky blue is actually quite close to this. So if I come back over to our colour sliders and just drop into one of your empty slots your sky blue. Now, if I start to pull this up and through to where the blue starts to come through, you'll notice that the reds that I placed earlier then start to get diluted out a bit. So moving up with the sliders, I will slightly just adjust these up just to get the coloration in a little bit more. Now, right off the dot, this is looking pretty close, and some people would be quite happy to go ahead and just say, yep, that's it, done. I'm ready to print with that. And of course, it's art is subjective, and if that's what you're happy with, that's what you like, absolutely, you can then go along and start to move these over to your colour core and save, and off you go. But you want to sort of build on this a little bit more. You want to try and get this as close as possible. Now I kind of noticed down here we've got this kind of brownishy greeny sort of colour. Now it's quite hard to get these smaller areas just because of where the layers will sort of sit. If you notice, it does kind of bounce between these mesh heights. So what we will do is if we go in, I think that looks kind of almost like a bronzy colour. So if we type in a bronze, and if we again just pull that in and pull this just ever so slightly, just so it's just above the black. Now, what you will also start to notice here is that these colours, again, they become quite muted. So this is where it's quite important here to then, once again, come in and to start manipulating your sliders here, just to start to pull the various different depths and the various different sort of colours out. Now, what you have also noticed, or may not have noticed here, is actually it's telling me that my blacks and my bronze are on the same layers. Now, as I did mention before, that you do need to be really careful of this. You do need to be quite cautious and actually watch just where your layer heights are coming in. So if I just give that a slight nudge above and see how that sits. Now, as you can see there, I have actually lost a little bit of depth. Now, if I come over here to my general options and actually just look at my size detail. My size detail is at 0.22. Now I generally run mine at a 0.10 just to bring in that depth, that detail size, just minutely. Sometimes you barely notice it, and other times it's actually like, oh, okay, yep, though that makes a huge difference. Now, what I also sometimes actually come in and do is, as I explained earlier, is I would actually come in and have a look at these spike removals. Now, if you sort of zone in here, let's bring this in here and just have a look at the details just around here on this wall. Now, if we come in and just fast remove some of these spikes over here, sometimes you may need to just slightly manipulate up and through before the colours really start to pick out. And again, just coming up and through in your mesh heights. So if we just pull this back out, because obviously what we don't want to do is lose too much of this detail. So if we just pull these up. Now, I think what's probably needed here, because this is looking a little bit washed out, is we probably need to almost double up on some of these colours. Now, it's quite simple. Now, instead of adding too many more colours, because we're already up to 6 colours. Now, if we go sort sliders, now this will actually show you the order in which your layers are actually currently laying. Now, I will generally look at these and sort of just look at the detail that's sort of surrounding it. Now, if you look here, I've got quite a bit of red appearing here. There is actually no red here at all. So this slider does need to be sort of coming up a little bit. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another blue in there, but I'm also going to add in just a little bit of white just between my blue layer. Maybe just bring this down. Now, this is the fun part of this. There is quite a lot of manipulation. Now, none of these are actually sort of, 5 minutes, you can be done. You do kind of need to be playing with these settings and really sort of zoning in on some of the parts, but then sometimes going a bit too far can also make it look quite washed out as well. But mine is obviously just through experience, sort of telling me as to where layers generally need to be added. So I think if we maybe go in with just probably a tad of white around about there. And again, let's just readjust them sliders. And then on top of that white, just because it's got that multi-tonal blending, if I then add in a little bit of blue back on, darker blue back on top of that, and then that should hopefully help a little bit maybe. Let's have a look. And then, so my red is quite well placed there, I think. And then my yellow, I think we could probably bring that yellow up quite a bit. And now if you actually notice up here, let's just zoom in on top of my lighthouse at the top. You'll actually notice here that this is now starting to give that blend. And this is why I said that you probably needed just that drop of the white in between the layers, just to help with that dimension there. Now you can also see your shading around here appearing in, and also the shade, the blue shade, also appearing around by the windows up here. Now, one thing I will say through experience and through printing a couple of dozen of these by now, often what it looks like on the screen, not with the colour is generally is quite accurate if you've got your TDs set correctly. But for the blotchiness, for what you see on the screen isn't what comes out of the printer. But also remembering that this is not a photocopier. So for as sharp lines and, you know, the very sharp blends that you've got here, you will never get here. You'll get very, very close, but you won't ever get completely sharp. Now, as you can see here, that's pretty close, and I would actually be quite happy with that. I would probably sit here for a little while and sort of manipulate this through a little bit, but that again would be quite boring for you. But what I will do at the end of this video, if you head over to my Facebook page, 3D Glow Hueforge tips and tutorials, I will actually upload it onto there as well, this exact image. So you can also go in, you can, using the techniques obviously I've been showing here, you can actually go and have a play yourselves and, you know, just have a play with the layers and have a play with using the various different spike removals, the different detail sizes. I give full permission for you to print this, sell this image. This is completely commercial free. If you wish to go ahead and use this for your leisure, that's absolutely your choice. And it would also be quite great to see some of your prints afterwards. Now, as I've said before in the last video, what you do here over in the mesh core, you must also now be transferring over to your colour core. So once again, the simplest way to do this, because obviously now we've got quite a few layers, and if you look, they're quite scattered through. The easiest way that I find to do that is by clicking and sorting sliders. Now, by doing that, that allows me to pretty much just go along the lines and dropping these in the correct spaces. I find this to be a lot easier. It makes the job quicker. And as you're going through, you can kind of use the buttons next to these and just give them a little slide up if they're not quite where you need them to be. So once you've done all that, you can then head off into your slicer, you can go File, Save Project As, save it as your file of, however you wish to save it. So we'll just save this as a windmill and hit save, and off you go. You can sort of save it. Now, I do hope that this has been somewhat helpful for you. This is obviously the very first video, so I didn't want to overcomplicate things. I wanted to try and keep things as simple as I could possibly keep them, and I probably have missed some information out here. But any questions, please do feel free to ask. As I said at the beginning, this is by far no way an expert. I'm not affiliated with Hueforge in any way. The way that I'm showing you is by far not the only way to do this. It's probably not the only correct way to do this. This is just sort of things that I have learned along the way over the last few months. And I've had quite a few very good successes. I've had some failures, but it's all the fun part of just learning. So thank you ever so much for watching. Like I said, I really, really hope that you have found this video quite helpful. And I will catch you in the next one. Thank you.